Today is the 4-year anniversary of the Parkland High School gun massacre. 17 people were gunned down
Justice
on
for
that
Bryce.
day, which sparked a movement of anti-gun reform.
Because he was bitching
But
about the
since then,
topic and then
almost
never
nothing has been done.
hated the topic.
Just has been the case for the other school massacres that have happened in the United States with semi-regularity. What message
Justice for
does this
Bryce.
send to children? Are we, the public, saying that there is nothing that can be done to protest them? Is it either to protect Second Amendment rights? Is it better to protect Second Amendment rights than attempt to protect kids learning in schools? Is the only solution to arm teachers and hope for the best? Yeah, so Parkland, it's Valentine's Day here in the States, and that's when it happened 4 years ago. There was a movement, and there were promises made and promises not kept. What a surprise when it comes to the gun reform movement, right? And so, like, what are we to say 4 years out from that moment in time, right? What are we to say to any of those people who, to the families of the people who died, right? So here's what you all have to say. We'll start with Wiggle.
It's so odd, man. You just kicked that guy, and then I just got to start the topic, man. What if he had something to say on this topic?
He was deafened. He didn't apparently give a shit. So fuck him. Wiggle.
Justice for Bryce. I'm just saying that. Justice for Bryce. Anyway, normally I would make this point just looking at like the 17-year-olds or like the 16-year-olds that are dead. But given recent ongoings on Twitch, I feel like I have to go younger for you people. So I'll say that like there's 7 14-year-olds that were like killed. 7 4. Imagine what you were doing when you were 14. Imagine the things that you thought about, the dreams you had, the little things that you thought were really important.
Really?
Maybe getting a certain rank in a video game, asking that one girl in your class, finally asking them out, being part of a certain group, getting invited to certain parties, the amount of optimism you had. And then imagine 7 of those people that same age, they're gone. They're completely gone. You gotta feel that weight. You have to understand what occurred, and that's just the 14-year-olds. They lost 3 17-year-olds, 1 16-year-old, 2 15-year-olds. One of those people was wearing like ROTC uniform. They said that that person was holding a door open, trying to help people. There was an 18-year-old, and then there was 3 adults, people older than I am, that were pretty brave. And those are the people that are gone because of that event. Then I'm not from Florida. I don't really like Florida. I don't really care too much about it. But I knew about this case. I knew about these events. I knew about the Orlando shooting in the nightclub. I knew about this. There's always something going on in Florida. And so before this panel, I went to watch some videos to hear what this guy had said.
I was a socialist
and
when I was 14.
He didn't really feel super remorseful. He took this approach of talking about like drug crimes, talking about marijuana, and talking about drugs being the problem, saying that he's reformed. He's really sorry. He wants the victims' families to make decisions about the situation. Felt really contrived. And I definitely feel really upset. But the thing that makes it really crazy for me is that people are talking about guns, and they're talking about this is like a problem with guns. This is a problem with guns in schools, etc. And I also have to ask you, if you were 19, I think this was the age of the guy at the time, and you had a weapon, would you have done this? Would you have done this? Would you have done something similar? So always think about that. And that's my opening statement, is think about that. Like, would you have done that if you had a gun? So why are we talking about guns in this case?
Scott, do you hear me?
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you say Scott. Yeah, oh, I'm so used to being called Fabio. Yeah, so, this is obviously a sad topic for a lot of people. And, I'm not going to get any nice guy points or any love from the community by essentially saying that, while this is a sad point, I hear from the left a lot of what reminds me of what I heard from the right growing up in the 90s, which was think of the children. And it always, whenever I hear think of the children, and I always hear these kind of these moments brought back, what I usually do is I know that means authoritarian bullshit that won't actually solve the problem. That's usually what I hear whenever I hear the term "think of the children" or I hear them invoke this. I mean, it is a tragedy. It absolutely is. And it was an extremely politicized tragedy, which it shouldn't have been. But, that's just kind of the state of American politics. This has been used as a galvanizing force by media organizations that wanted to put kids that should have been talking to psychologists and out of media attention right up front so that they could turn them into this. They could use them and turn them into political chess pieces, which is fucking disgusting. And they wanted to use it as a means of implementing gun control. And almost every single thing that we heard about gun control was not only authoritarian, not only against the Second Amendment, and not only just kind of morally wrong from my position, but completely ineffective in the ways that they would actually help solve gun violence in general, as well as reduce school shootings. The fact of the matter is we've done a lot of research, and what we know is that these are limit cases, and that while gun control may have some effect on these limit cases, mental health may have some effect on these limit cases, investigating the science behind these limit cases and serotonin reuptake inhibitors and SSRIs, all of these things may have some effects. The idea that any one policy is actually going to solve this has just been cheap political games from the left to use this as a means of going after the right-wingers and guns, and it's disgusting. And shame on anyone that uses it to invoke it for such reasons.
Oh boy. No, nice guy points indeed. Scrawn.
Okay, right, so Biden's crackdown on ghost guns for me is the real hot button issue in all this. I agree with Scott that it is being used to take measures which I don't think are appropriate. It seems like you're just trying to dampen the damage that gets done when it doesn't do anything about the will behind the gun use. I don't want a student taking good shots or bad shots at another student with a gun. That's what that policy Biden's looking at is basically going to cover. I'm not suddenly happy because, well, at least they have terrible aim thanks to this policy, which I can imagine being a disaster when you get more stray shots happening. School shootings aren't always active shooters gunning down a bunch of people. It can be a grudge by a disgruntled student against a single target, like a racist teacher bullying them. I don't want that tragic situation ending in a bystander getting shot, thanks to a policy like this. So I don't like generally any government plan that sounds like chasing ghosts, and cracking down on ghost guns sounds a lot like that. I also think the media has sensationalized this a bit, where it may just be about the loophole factor specifically. So what is the intent behind the law that prevents someone purchasing a gun? Because that's what the law is. It's saying, hey, the loophole is that you can just print a gun,
it's basically
right?
trying
Maybe you'd have to actually issue a separate charge for being disallowed from owning a gun altogether. That's a certain level of criminality you're attributing to a person with this.
Yeah, the gun show loophole
be a reason for someone to be banned
not a
from
loophole,
purchasing a gun,
less
but
than
not
1%
from
of
owning one.
purchases.
I think that's an interesting discussion to have, and I'd like to hear from people like Scott weighing in on this. Yeah.
Hey, top dolphin.
Okay. Something that bugs me, super quick, about the last topic. Someone said that it's not that easy to change law. A lot of times when it comes to local laws, it's super easy. You talk to a councilman, you show up to one meeting, and you get laws changed like that as long as you have a good plan.
I've been trying to. Sorry, you've interjected with that. I have to interject with an.
No, you don't. No, you don't.
I think this is my opening. Right?
It is your opening.
So, anyways, on this specific case,
you can have the guns I want. Fuck you,
I want to say that,
Facts, Woodsman.
It's sad that 17 students had to lose their lives, and gun violence is definitely something that we deal with, a unique problem we have in the United States that we have to deal with in very unique ways. I think a lot of the times we just, when it comes to gun legislation, a lot of the plans that are put out against the people who want to enforce legislation against guns don't actually look at the data and don't actually do anything to get rid of gun violence. And a lot of the plans and a lot of the anti-gun people are just irrational and fucking stupid. There's very little good conversation about guns on the internet. There are lots of really effective measures that we could take that will actually help reduce the number of people dying in this country to guns. But instead, it's either, oh my God, you're restricting on my rights, or it's like ban AR-15s that kill like nobody, right? If we want to do something like when it comes to gun reform, there's lots of sensible policies, including background checks. We could change the age for ownership of firearms if we wanted to do that. Certain types of firearms. We could put more restrictions on pistols, because pistols are the things that kill most people. Put restrictions on how people should who own guns take care of them and store them, and require things like safes. But instead, the conversation is always, oh my god, you're infringing on my rights, or it's fucking AR-15s are fucking demon fucking military murder weapons, and like there's no reasonable conversation in the middle.
Yeah, the reasonable conversation is always in the middle.
Please.
It's always compromise with the left. That's what's reasonable.
Hello.
You don't compromise with the left.
Something I found interesting about this issue is if you look at the article for this, it says the U.S. Secret Service's National Threat Assessment Center studied school attacks nationwide from 2006 through 2018 and reported that most attackers were bullied and that warning signs were there. Most important, the researchers said, about 94% talked about their attacks and what they intended to do in some way, whether orally or electronically, and 75% were detected because they talked about their plots. About 36% were thwarted within 2 days of their possible intended attacks. Mm-hmm. I think the epidemic of school shootings is really sad, and I don't think that I don't feel the need to take away people's guns. I don't think I don't see gun culture in America ever changing. It's something that's kind of like ingrained in our society. But I do think it's interesting to look at how these things happen. Like why does this happen? And whenever a gun attack happens, there is a tendency for there to be like mimicked attacks too. So I think I'm not sure what the solution is here. But there were a lot of people who lost lives, lost their children's lives, who have to live with that emptiness now that they lost. I guess that's all I have to say on this. Really, is I don't know what the solution is.
That's about all I got to say about that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. All right, we'll go to last username.
Okay, so yeah, this is a big topic. So first of all, I think it's actually I'm encouraged, but that politicians are not passing laws in response to relatively rare, emotionally charged events like school shootings, because that's generally not a good way to make laws. 400 you shouldn't make laws as kind of reactions to things like that.
The data.
You should make laws based on data and based on thinking things through, and like laws are not. You should not be an impulsive legislator. So I actually encourage that we don't have those kind of laws being made. As far as like what is the cause of these things? I mean, a lot of things have to go wrong for a school shooting to happen. Mm-hmm. You could say maybe there is something wrong with gun regulation. Maybe there is something wrong with mental health. And maybe there's something wrong with the school system. Maybe like all law enforcement. These could all be true. I think we should be careful that when we're talking about one problem, we don't say that problem is the only one and that all these other problems are invalid. There can only be one cause. But there is one particular cause that I want to talk about here, and that's the fact that we think of teenagers as angsty, and I don't actually see why teenagers should be particularly angsty. I think the reason they are is because we built a society where teenagers live in these weird artificial bubbles where they're kept as children when biologically and hormonally and mentally they're trying to be adults as hard as they can, and we're not letting them. And I think that's causing a lot of stress, and on the extremes it's causing them to do really extreme things that they otherwise wouldn't need to do.
Dude,
and I think we've constructed a system that is really, really cruel to young people, and for no good reason. It's not helping them in any way. It's just making their lives difficult. And I'd like to see if we can talk about that here tonight.
Oh my God.
Let's go to Doobie, please.
Fucking facts.
Yeah, so I semi-agree with Scott and last username actually. I think the
fucking let's go.
The issue of like mass shootings is actually pretty small. Right? You have a very small percentage of the gun deaths in the United States are the result of mass shootings. What's way more common is gun deaths by suicide and murder, like gang violence, typically. So that's true. But given that in like 2020, for example, we had about 45,000 people in the United States that either committed suicide or murdered with a gun.
Really
right? And this is not taking into account the people that were injured in similar circumstances, right? Either attempted suicides or assaults with a deadly weapon, which was a gun. I think it's an issue enough that we should look at regulating these what are in effect toys. And I think I'd go a lot further than the AR-15, right? The scary looking military gun. I'd actually restrict handguns. I think there's no good reason in modern day United States for somebody to have a handgun in their home, right? I think that we should be looking at where the problem is, and the problem is typically handguns, primary issues, but you should also expand from there. I don't think that short of like hunting permits, that you don't need a fucking handgun or a shotgun or a fucking rifle. You just don't need these things. And given that so many people in our country die every year from as a result of a situation involving one of these things, then yeah, I think there's a good argument for getting rid of them.
Okay, open to the panel.
Doobie, I'm you had me so good in the beginning, right? You were agreeing that this is a multifaceted issue, right? And then you did as you do, which is try and find what is the most contrarian point to the panel to stoke the most amount of controversy. And you said we need more gun regulation that would restrict handguns. Assuming that any of the regulations that have been proposed would even fucking work in getting rid of guns, which most of them don't, and assuming that you wouldn't have a similar situation like in the UK in 1997 when they initiated strict gun regulation and they had peaks in violent crime because it actually doesn't solve many of these problems, even if they did get rid of the guns. So what we're going to do is we're going to assume, number one, that the regulations that have been put forward, or that you have some other regulation that would actually get rid of guns. And we're going to assume that all of the data that we have that shows that stricter gun control laws increase crime and that laxer gun control laws decrease, according to the National Crime Victimization Survey, decrease victimization and actually help people. Even with all of that, the point of the Second Amendment, the point of shall not be infringed, is not to fucking hunt, and it's not for home self-defense. The point of the Second Amendment is to protect you from an authoritarian government. That is the point. And so if you want to get rid of that, then unfortunately, I think you're wrong, but even if you are wrong and you believe in this nation's kind of like constitution or any form of government as it's set, then you need to get together a constitutional convention. And you need to get 2/3 of the states to agree to it, and then you need to get 2/3 of the Senate and House to agree to it, because the entire point of the Second Amendment is the Thomas Jefferson quote that the tree of liberty needs to be watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants alike.
Yeah, so I agree, right, that was the point of the Second Amendment, obviously. It's pretty clear from the founders. But I don't think that means that we can't regulate guns, right? And like I said, short of like hunting permits, I don't think there's a good reason to have a gun. And I don't think that this fantasy, the American population rising up as like one force in fighting a tyrannical government is reason enough to put up with 45,000 deaths a year from guns, right? I don't think that's enough to justify.
No
this.
one's. Who's making that argument? Why are you making that argument?
You're saying that, hey, used to be that people could resist the government effectively when they had muskets and shit, right? So when the government has drones and tanks, right? Well, okay, then why even bring up this
Afghanistan resisted the government. Afghanistan resisted our government for 20 fucking years.
Not at all comparable to Afghanistan, because these are American citizens we're talking about. And what's going to happen?
Is there something special about the Afghani people?
If
I'm finished, Doobie, please.
We have evidence of what happens, right, when one of these militia groups, one of these groups of people with guns tries to resist the government, you get Waco, right? The government just fucks you up anyway, and you're presented to everybody else is domestic terrorists who murdered innocent officers and shit, right? Because that's the reality of the situation. You're not going to get a situation where the public agrees with you shooting cops when they come to take your toys away.
The government really doesn't want another Waco.
I think
that affects the decisions they make.
Yeah, of course. But not only that, Richmond, Virginia, where I live, when we protested 20,000 strong with our firearms and told the state of Virginia and the state capital, hey, motherfucker, don't come for our guns. And you know what? They curtailed
the head of ATF, and then he couldn't go through.
He couldn't go through, exactly. And they tried to initiate a ton of gun legislation. And what ended up happening is the combination of that protest with a lot of rural sheriffs saying that we refuse to enforce these things, got rid of essentially almost every single piece of gun legislation that they wanted to put through, except for in the city of Richmond, and the cops don't enforce any of those fucking laws. So if you wanted an example of why you need your Second Amendment and why you need to remind politicians from time to time, hey, go fuck yourself, because if we wanted to, we could fuck you up, that's one example. But again, you said putting up with 45,000 gun deaths a year, and I simply counter with the massive body of evidence that's done by economists and not by public health experts that show time and time again that stricter gun control laws don't reduce death, don't reduce violent crime, and instead have the exact opposite effect.
Okay.
Wait.
Oh, Doobie, you can respond to that if you like, then we'll go to status and Squan.
So he is correct, but I think what's the word I'm looking for? I'm just to say you're correct, right? So violent crime does go up. We saw this in the UK. It's true that there were peaks in violent crime after they got rid of people's ability to have guns, right? But what we also saw was that the rate of deaths as a result of these violent crimes massively decreased. Right? You had people being beaten, people being stabbed, but they weren't fucking dying, right? So overall, right, more people are alive, even if they are assaulted, right? So even though they have more like fucking stabbings in the UK, they don't have people getting shot in the street in broad daylight like we have here in the United States. Right, so yeah, it's true. We might need to deal with more bold robbers and muggers, right? Because they don't need to worry about the possibility that somebody has a handgun in their pocket. But even if you were to deal with one of those people, there's a really good chance you're going to live to see the next day.
So your argument is that it's okay
to carry a knife with you.
Let's get started. Squan and Wiggle and Lester's name if he wants. Stardust, they're muted.
Sorry. I think Doobie is right on one thing. The idea that a bunch of citizens are going to rise up and overthrow the government or threaten the government even is ridiculous. The second thing I would say is that I think Doobie is wrong. I don't think we can outlaw guns because I think gun culture is such an integral part of America. So I don't see that plausibly being a thing. What I could see though, right, if we handle both of these issues, is if we start just allowing citizens to own anything, right? And what I'm saying is that if you really want to give citizens the ability to overthrow their government if they really need to, we should be allowing every citizen to own explosives, to own tanks, to own anything under the sun. So, we can protect ourselves.
Agreed. That's actually in the Second Amendment when it says well-regulated militia. Facts. That is actually the intention of the Constitution.
I want tanks for everybody.
Yes, that is the Second Amendment.
Yes. I want the high school parking lot to be filled with tanks, okay? All of those high school students are going to be hella safe if they get into those tanks. School shooters can't mess with fucking tanks, all right?
Facts.
This is the real solution. So, Doobie may be right, Doobie may be right. This is a completely ridiculous idea that we would ever think that we can just rise up and intimidate the government.
Your
we
terms
can't.
are acceptable.
But we have.
Maybe like 100, 200 years ago.
Sorry,
you know,
it was too good.
On the right wing of America, there's different groups that have been doing this. Like
okay, shut up, Wiggle. It's my turn to speak right now. I said I wasn't going to yell vowels anymore.
You let him speak, and then it was right, and you're like, shut up.
Okay, so anyways, like I was saying, I think I want
China
to look
over?
into every high school and see that the parking lot is lined with tanks,
in the
so we can protect our children from school.
They just
shooters.
want you to think
Thank
it's
you.
China taking over.
Hey,
it's your own state.
And then the Wiggle.
Yeah. Doobie seems to scale up the school shooter problem to a revolutionary problem, and I think the solution is the same: tackling the desire a person might have to act out like that over having guns. Doobie is so quick to say we shouldn't have guns, rather than we should have people not want to use guns on each other. Stardust agrees with Doobie and goes full tanky on us by saying, hey, going to war with a country is futility. Let's have tanks for everyone if we're gonna have anything.
And me.
Is that reason to accept tyranny? I think part of the problem here is these are like printed guns that people are wanting. So they're wanting to have, the capacity for guerrilla warfare against these drone strikes. You've got a bit of an arms race here, and you're tying the citizens' hands behind their back as the state when you're arguing as Doobie and Stardust are pushing.
Wiggle?
Yeah, I was gonna say that, like, going off of what Stardust
this topic
saying,
requires some EDM.
I can
gotta
agree
kick
that,
up this
like,
fucking-
the success of these
gotta
things
kick this
and
up,
overturning our government or something to that extent hasn't happened. But the idea that the threat hasn't been there, I believe it is there. I think our own government says there's a threat of right-wing extremism, and then these individuals within these movements have instilled a level of power within the government through threats. You had an attempted kidnapping of, what was it, the Michigan governor. You had January 6th. I think you've had a Capitol building be almost seized as well. So like all of these are examples of threats that haven't gone through fully, where they were failures that resulted in these groups gaining more power within our government. There's more people that are listening to them. There's more people listening to what they think and what these people believe. Outside of that, talking about the park, like the situation in the school in Parkland in particular, I think there is also the idea of mental health, like worrying about mental health. Like you guys were describing, in a lot of these instances, these people tell you, shooters in particular tell you that they're going to do this. They disclaim that they have these ideas, etc., and it's often ignored. Why? Why are you ignoring these children that are saying, why do you care about the children after the shooting happens and care about everything they say, especially about gun rights? But you don't listen to the children before this happens, the ones that are killing people. And then on top of that, there's a couple of deaths, I think, that happened post the Parkland event from kids that had survivorship bias, etc., that committed suicide. And that is from mental health issues that happen stemming from this traumatic event. I think there has to be more of a focus on that in the country as well.
Real quick, Wiggle, just so you know, the feds also say that COVID misinformation is a reason to beware of terrorism. So I don't know that the terror threats from the feds is necessarily a good metric to use in terms of right wing doing and isn't doing. And also the Governor Whitmer kidnapping plot was almost exclusively operated and planned by the FBI, and that's not a conspiracy theory. You can literally read tons of news articles. The guy who ran the plot was a mentally ill person that lived in the basement of a dry cleaning facility that didn't own a car, and the FBI agents and informants working with them had to give them rides constantly in their vans so that they could actually try and enact this plot. And the idea of blowing up a bridge was also the FBI's idea, and then it failed because the FBI then arrested them at the moment that they were planning to enact it. So this is actually just the FBI intentionally causing terrorism and then arresting people for terrorism so that they can support their own need for a job. And that is why the FBI is known statistically as the #1 sponsor of of domestic terrorism in the United States of America.
I definitely want to learn more about this, especially if you believe I'm spreading misinformation.
I don't think you're spreading misinformation. I was just letting you know
that's effectively what I'm doing, right? If I'm saying something that is not the case and you know it, I don't take it as like you're attacking me. You're attacking the information, and I would want to know more about it because it seems pretty exciting to me. Because since nobody was actually harmed in the end, it's still a very exciting situation to hear about. My major point was just the idea that the government.
Yeah, it was BuzzFeed News was the one that broke the story.
We think about the federal government as like answering, like the FBI answering to the federal government. They're an agency of the federal government that we hold steady. And it seems like they're saying that there's this threat. And at the same time, it feels like that threat is gaining more power within our federal government. So I was pointing out this kind of like weird hypocrisy of like them saying right-wing extremism is this crazy threat. We have to be weary of it as well. And then it seems like with every one of these threats that happens, they're gaining more power within our government. There seems to be a fracturing within the GOP in support of these groups against what you would say is the old guard now. And so it goes against what I believe Stardust was saying earlier of this idea that these threats aren't gaining something. There's only loss, not so much of a gain.
Okay, let's go to Squan, and then last prisoner.
Yeah, I think Wiggle raises a very good point. With Jan 6, I'm not sure you can have it quite both ways, where revolutionaries are incompetent yet threatening. It's that problem. If people on the left are willing to call January 6th an attempted insurrection and acknowledge it as a threat, then there should be a recognition of people having capability to counter what they perceive to be government tyranny. I can still say I want to tackle the motivation behind the revolutionary action and dampen the extremism behind it, rather than just take guns away, right?
Cringe. So can I respond?
Let's go to last year's name, then you can respond.
Okay.
So I'm rewinding a little bit in the conversation here, but you don't need
every day
everyone.
January 6th.
You don't need to shoot a gun in order for it to have an effect on the political situation in your country, right? It may be that
the red repressive tolerance on the screen.
No. Average citizens of America and their personal
full book
firearms would not stand a chance in some sort of all-out war.
I've read some chapters and some excerpts from
but
repressive
that's beside the point.
That might be something.
The question is, how does the fact that there are so many guns owned by American citizens affect the decisions that the American government makes? The harder it is to oppress people, the less likely it is to happen. Even if it's ultimately possible, the fact that it would be more difficult because people would have guns and you'd have to deal with that makes it significantly less likely to happen. If this sounds, I know it's really hard for some people to think about things like that because it seems so absurd and just like it's from another planet or another reality or something. But remember
the idea that we're armed.
Take a look around you. Take a look around the world
with us
and look at. There are big, scary, powerful countries that have overpowered their population and become very, very dangerous to the world. Countries like Russia and China. And you need to ask yourself, what stops America? Why is America not like that? Why is there this one really powerful country that seems a lot more accountable to its people? It could be a lot of reasons. Maybe one of those reasons is that the Americans have more power to stand up to them. And so standing up to your country is not just about protecting yourself, or not even just about protecting Americans. It's about actually protecting the rest of the world.
I think a lot of people actually did get scared.
That America could become
of the possibility.
China or Russia. And just like it's hard to think about how your individual actions affect, climate change and flooding on the other side of the world, it might be hard to think about how your individual attitudes toward guns affect the safety of the rest of the world, but it's something you just kind of have to do and think about these crazy things. All right.
Okay. So I'm a tiny bit distracted. So if I miss something that you guys said, just correct me. But I think it's interesting that we brought up that the January 6th thing was brought up because I think Scott said that the original intention of the founding fathers with the Second Amendment was to ensure that the population had a way to resist a tyrannical government. People on January 6th thought they were dealing with a tyrannical government that had corrupted their democracy, right, to take away their power, right? And they marched. A lot of these people marched into that Capitol building with fully believing in their heart of hearts that they were fighting some kind of fascist takeover, right, by the Democrats, right? So Scott, can you tell me, like, if some of those people had taken weapons, right, and used them to fire upon the agents of that tyrannical government, right? Do you feel like that would have been like a justified thing for them to do, right? Like at what level, right? Because I'm not assuming that you think it'd be okay for them to shoot cops at the Capitol building, right? But at what level do we decide, hey, this is where it's tyrannical, and this is where it's okay to resist and use your weapons? Like what's the line there?
Are you asking for what is tactically best for the best of our nation, or what is morally justified?
I would say morally justified.
Yeah, because it's two totally different answers for me, right?
Yeah, so, I don't think
moral justification is yeah. I mean, I think Texas v Supreme Court absolutely proves that the entire justice system and the entire American government failed in almost all of their responsibilities to uphold the idea of securing election integrity, and that the fact that multiple states were illegally or in some ways legally denying people the right, denying the other parties the right to investigate things of that nature, absolutely constitute a failure of government to such a degree that I believe that they would have been morally justified in doing so. Showing up armed and taking over the Capitol, they would have been morally justified in doing so. It would have been tactically stupid. I think the best tactical decision was they all should have brought weapons, and they shouldn't have gone into the building. And they should have just let them know, like, hey, motherfuckers, we're here. That's my answer.
Wait, so, okay, but beyond like this kind of like grandstanding, hey, motherfuckers, we're here. Like you're something that they should have done there, or like what the Black Panthers did in California. I forget when, right, when they went to the Capitol with their weapons. Like I'm talking about, if they are resisted, right? If the government, if the security guards or the police decide, hey, we don't want you bringing those weapons around elected representatives, right? Do they then get to fire upon those police or the security guards? Do they get to shoot the representatives that are enacting the policies that they disagree with?
I feel like you're attempting to trick me or trap me. You already know.
No, I'm not. I'm asking a very straightforward question.
You already know that I believe in the non-aggression principle, right? So I think that they have every right to protest, and I think they have every right to stand their ground. And I think if police want to attempt to forcibly disarm them, then they have the right to defend themselves by any means necessary.
Oh, okay.
But do they have a right to fucking encroach upon the cops and just start shooting cops because they say no? No.
But isn't that toothless? So if you're saying that all they should do, right, in response to this tyrannical government imposing tyrannical policies upon them, is show up and say, "Hey, motherfucker, we're here."
I'm not a pacifist, right? Let's put it in a better context so maybe you can understand, right? So the Freedom Convoy, right? In Canada, Canada has acted aggressively and used violence as a means of stopping its citizens from being able to obtain meaningful work, locking them down in their homes with the threat of violence. And so by following the non-aggression principle, what has occurred is that a large group of truckers have decided that enough is enough, that the state has committed enough violence on them, and that they're going to start shutting down roads, and they're going to start honking their fucking horns. People complained, they stopped honking their horns as much, but they protested, right? Now, what has Trudeau done? Trudeau has responded by deciding that instead of being reasonable here, instead of negotiating, and instead of stopping this violence, he's going to threaten more violence. Now, it's not justified of them to start taking over the capital, but I think it is justified of them to grab boats and shut down the harbors and the economy in Nova Scotia. And then, if it escalates, it escalates. At a certain point, you are morally justified and not toothless in fighting and using political violence against the state if they refuse to stop their political violence. I don't think January 6th was necessarily the level of political violence that would be morally justified, but I do think you know, like I think that's a gray area, but I do think that the best justification would have been for them to show up armed and for them to make their voices and themselves.
That's silly though.
Why is that silly? What's silly?
Because these people genuinely believed that their democracy, right, had been corrupted and stolen, right? That their vote, right, in this democratic republic we have, had been stripped away, and now these politicians were imposing their own will upon the people, right? So they were like being it's a word that's saying governance without representation. I can't remember.
Taxation without representation. But I think this is getting really far away from the Parkland.
No, it's not. We're like right in the point, right? Because if they genuinely believe this, right? This isn't.
I'm still there. Keep going.
Yeah, this isn't just, you know, a regulation on their firearms. This is their fucking government being taken over by an undemocratic system, right? By fascist politicians, right? Authoritarians who just said fuck the will of the people. It's our place now. Right. So if that's not enough justification for you to say that it would be morally justified for them to use force to end that occupation of their government, then it just seems like you're proposing like a toothless, like a
I already gave you my answer, and I don't know why you would want me to go further than saying it is morally justified for them to have violently taken the Capitol. I feel like you're being a bit absurd here, because I already gave you my justification, which is the non-aggression principle, and tried to recontextualize it in the Freedom Convoy situation and how moving aggression, you know, understanding that you have to respond with reasonable force and defense. So, you know, I think, again, this is getting away from the Parkland incident, and you're hoping to get a hot take out of me further than what I said.
I'm really not.
And I'm kind of already in like, or
that's what it feels like.
No, I'm not trying to get a hot take. I'm just trying to get you to basically
what would you like me to go further?
Because
I gave you the moral justification. No, I gave you the moral justification.
Here's the issue with
that
that line
is morally
of thinking,
justified
right?
for people to have violently taken the Capitol, and you're trying to get me to say more, which honestly, already I'm skirting the lines of Twitch's TOS. So what do you want from me, Doobie, in this discussion about gun control and the Parkland shooting?
Okay, so what I want from you, right, is so the reason I really wanted to hit on that point is because I think one of the many issues with that stance is that this was a tiny majority of even that group of people who entered the Capitol building, right? But it's an even smaller proportion of the entire population of the United States, right? So.
And it was only 3% that fought and won the Revolutionary War against the largest empire the world's ever known.
God, please. Okay, but we can look all over the United States and find different groups of people, whether they're like white nationalists or they're black nationalists or they're whatever the fuck, who feel like they're living under an oppressive regime that is taking their rights.
Yeah, and this is why I'm an anarchist.
Or intentionally breeding them out of the
population.
population.
Thank you for joining
so
the
with
anarchist
that line
club.
of thinking, with that line of thinking, you're saying that it'll be morally justified for these people who believe that their government is oppressing them to rise up and kill government officials, right? Which is, I think, fucking ridiculous, right?
So now it's not. Now it's too toothless. Now it's fucking ridiculous for
of these people rising up against the government against tyranny, to water the fucking tree or whatever the fuck.
Pick your stance and get back on topic.
That is a fantasy. It's a fairy tale. It's not going to happen. It shouldn't happen. We shouldn't encourage people to think that way, right? So that being said, given that
no, I disagree.
Hold on. Given that fantasy is not a good reason to allow people to keep these toys, right? There's no, and we know that in fucking home invasion situations, right? People are more likely to have their guns used against them, right? I think we're much better off just regulating these things out of existence as much as possible.
You know, those studies that are done are actually pretty bullshit. They're not, when you see them done,
your studies, when you do them, okay, that's fine.
All the studies are bullshit. When you see them done by economists as opposed to public health experts, and they actually do panel studies as opposed to doing studies like based off of specific localities and things of that nature, when you actually look at national crime victimization and Bureau of Justice statistics, what you see is that those do not become statistically significant in that direction. Public health experts tend to do a lot of tricky things with the numbers so that they can justify the position of gun control.
Yeah, that's fine. But like I said earlier, I agree
studies for and against
that in
both
other
directions.
cases they had like peaks of violent crime when they got rid of guns because people didn't need to worry about guns being in the home or guns being in someone's pocket, right? So that's true. But I care about the consequences. And right now, the consequence of allowing people to have these toys in their pocket and at their home is that more of my people are dying. I care about my people. I love my people. I don't want them to die. If that means that they get stabbed when they get mugged instead of getting shot,
gun control policies have become racist
okay.
institutions that disproportionately affect low socioeconomic status, Black, brown, and Hispanic people, and their ability to be able to purchase firearms to defend themselves. That's what I think.
Why are you saying? Why are you saying?
But the reality,
your people, like, what are you describing as your people?
Americans.
What do you mean, you people?
American citizens.
Yeah, so like,
my people, the Americans are my people. American
right, but you already admitted that the data showed that more gun control.
Why wouldn't you see it as
violence?
like empowering? There's groups of people that people say, and I believe you believe as well, that they're biologically weaker. You say that women are like I've heard you say like biologically weaker than a biological male, etc. So why wouldn't you want them to have some form of equalizer? Why wouldn't you want them to have the ability to purchase something like a firearm? Which is
Mark, can I get a quick
to help equalize that so that they feel more empowered and they can buy with their own money.
You can get a knife or a taser or one of those cat claw, those tiger claw things that women have that people they sell for when women are driving. They can like squeeze this thing in their fist and it like knives pop out. Right? They can have all these other things that can also equalize the situation. Right? And we know
power.
And we know that given that in the vast majority of situations, right, people are not fully trained with these weapons to the point where they can pull it out immediately, quickly enough to counter somebody that suddenly just fucking grabbed them by the arms, right? They're way more likely not only to have those guns used against them, but just not be able to use them at all, for it to be tossed aside where they're being attacked.
Yeah,
right?
that's
Which
bullshit.
All the fucking
That's
time,
bullshit.
And then it gets stolen.
That's a lie.
Right?
That's a lie.
Happens all the fucking time.
It's a lie. It's not what the data actually
not
shows.
Not everybody is like John Wick to just pull out a gun in 2 seconds and shoot somebody in the face.
That's a lie. That's not what the data shows. What the data shows is when you compare passive resistance to active resistance, that passive resistance is better. But when you actually break down active resistance by weapon, what you find is that if you are going to actively resist in these encounters, that the firearm acts as a force multiplier that is far more effective at physically fighting back than any other weapon, be it tasers, be it mace, be it bats, be it anything. What you're doing is you're conflating the idea of guns versus passive resistance and then trying to use that as if the data actually shows that guns are a problem, but if we didn't have guns, that the gun will be used against you in situations like that. That's a problem. So what you're really saying when you say the guns will just be used against you is do not physically defend yourself, because that is the point that you are actually arguing, is that people shouldn't have guns, because what they should do is they should let people invade their homes, and they should let people rob them, and they should let people rape them, and they should let people do violent things. That's the way that you're using the data, and I simply disagree with that. I think people have a right to defend themselves, and I think the right of self-defense and gun ownership acts as a strong deterrent to violent crime.
I think the advice you're giving people, maybe it makes sense to you because you're a tall dude, you're a strong dude, right? And if someone were to attack you on the street, you could probably
actually makes the most sense to women,
right? But for a woman, right, or even like a smaller man, right? I think that this advice could actually lead to them being hurt.
Actually, no, because it's the exact opposite.
Because if someone's being mugged, right, having their wallet taken, right, you're probably better off, right, even if the other person doesn't have a weapon, you're probably better off just letting them take the fucking wallet, right, than trying to fight back or run away, because if this person does have a knife, you're probably going to get stabbed, right, and if you don't want to get stabbed, you give them the fucking wallet, that this piece of property isn't worth your life, right. So
thank you for biting the bullet and saying don't defend yourself.
Isn't that what that's what you're condemned to, through no choice of your own for the rest of your life, based on immutable characteristics.
He wants to disarm you so that you can't defend
always
yourself.
Having Doobie or Scott walk up to you and take your wallet, take your lunch money, even when you're a 45-year-old mother with kids, doesn't matter, because the tall person can always walk up to you.
Gun won't help in that case either. Like, it won't. Or in I don't know, a gun, like, it's very low percentage, I feel like, if you, of that actually helping you. If you're in a situation where somebody is taking you by surprise, you have to have enough mental, like if you haven't gone into the fight or flight thing, you hopefully have enough in your head to think about getting the gun. But in a lot of situations, that doesn't even turn into a thing, or the person is bigger than you and they overpower you, or they can they take your gun. It doesn't necessarily mean that that you're going to be okay in that situation.
So you believe that, like, in situations...
I can't find it. I've been looking for it, but there's a massive study on this that was done by Harvard, in which they actually tracked women. They tracked like defensive gun users, and specifically they separated women from one of the categories. And I think it was literally like 0 or 1 instance out of like thousands in which women tried to defend themselves with a gun and like succeeded. Like it never works. It doesn't work.
People aren't fucking like action movie stars.
Recommending that women try to defend
Yeah, you're right.
this way is like actually like.
I'd love to take a look at the methodology of a study.
Because like you're just.
I just
get, like, hurt more
straight up. I would love to
the
take a look at the methodology of a study that says that 1 woman out of thousands was ever able to defend themselves, and women should just lay down and fucking take it.
With the situations you guys are describing, where somebody has
no,
a
I
knife,
actually said that bats are like, and knives, they're a much more effective weapon. Pepper spray, much more effective.
In the situations that you guys are describing of like somebody having some form of weapon and they're coming up to you and they are stronger, more physically stronger than you,
fuck.
Optically at least, and then they want your wallet. Why do you believe that if you give them what they want, they won't ask for more? Like why do you take them as a rational actor? Why do you take them in that way if they're acting irrationally to you? Do you think it's rational that they're like
their main goal is to get your wallet? If their main goal is to get
at knife point, isn't that what you would believe? Or you believe that it's irrational?
Their main goal is to get your wallet.
To steal things from people,
God.
right?
Yeah.
Guys, if the main goal is for them to get your wallet, and if they get your wallet, they have fulfilled their goal. They're gonna go away. Like if there are other goals there, like they want to rape you, then yeah, they're gonna leave when they get what they want.
I really wish David Carradine didn't die, because apparently, according to Harvard, all women should be trained by Bill, as in Kill Bill, because the most effective way to defend themselves is not firearms as a force multiplier, but samurai swords and bats. So we gotta resurrect David Carradine so that we can protect ourselves, ladies.
I think it's more so that if you're gonna move to an area, you should look at the local laws about like stabbing people, and if you move there, like you should be, like you should never have a knife, and you shouldn't stab anyone. So the idea of me walking,
just arm pigs.
And yes, I will steal arguments from chat
going
if
to
they're
live
good.
somewhere in New York and getting like stabbed
Retro
should
God.
not happen, because the law says so, and I read the law before I moved here.
Does anybody think that you should be not allowed to have guns because they don't work that well? Supposing they don't work that well in defending you?
I never said people shouldn't be able to allow guns. Maybe we did, but I think people said that we can probably just propose like reasonable restrictions on guns, right? So like there's a lot of things we can do. Like one thing that we don't allow felons to have guns. Like this is a thing. And one way a lot of felons get guns from law-abiding gun owners. So like requiring background checks for private sales of firearms is probably like a reasonable thing we could do.
The Obama administration stopped reporting of background checks because out of 76,000 instances where NICS screening occurred, only 44 people were actually not false flags, and of them 26 were prosecuted, and of them 13 were actually convicted, because background check system that we have currently is a racist based system that does not do what companies actually require, and instead simply looks at similar names to felons. And when 30% of the black community in America is actually unable to get a firearm because of certain legal or mental health restrictions, what this means is that low socioeconomic status black people are the most likely to be affected by background checks and false flags that are extremely expensive and difficult for them to get their gun rights back. And so the idea of background checks, maybe we could talk about background check reforms, but when you realize that only 13 people had enough evidence out of 76,000 to be prosecuted, the simple fact of the matter is that criminals may be dumb, but they're not dumb enough to go do a background check to get a firearm. they'll simply get them
because
illegally.
all the criminals go get their guns from private sales where background checks aren't required.
Straw purchases
Guys,
from individuals only make up 7% of gun
we
sales.
should go more to like last username seemed to be asking the three people.
Yeah.
Like, that'd be Dolphin, Stardust, and Doobie. Why?
Yeah, it's fine. I just want to correct misinformation when it's put out there.
I personally, I never grew up with guns, but I don't ever see the culture in America changing. I don't think I don't see anything around that changing. And I'm not anti-gun either. I think everybody should be able to own what they want, as long as they're not hurting anybody. But I just don't know what the solution is. The only reason I chime in is because I don't think in a lot of situations guns are as useful as people make them out to be. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the matter.
As cool as I think guns are, I'm not going to claim that like everyone should be running around with guns like hanging off their backs all the time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's a great idea.
Well, look, but the matter is ownership here, right? Isn't a whole point of it like the Biden crackdown on ghost guns? That's a matter of ownership, period, right? And in the case of a criminal, which Biden's ghost gun loophole is about, like criminals possessing guns when they're told they're not allowed to buy guns, right? There's something to be said for compromising of convicted criminals' preparedness for violence, political or otherwise. So Dolphin brought up criminals having guns and background checks. That's something I want to be focusing on. Scott brings up the background check system has racial bias, and so it's interesting that minorities would be most affected by Biden's ghost gun crackdown.
Cool,
can
guys.
I just say that I think it's
really you've come to the base position, dude. Did you know that like laws are racist, so we should get rid of laws? Did you know that police are racist? We should get rid of guns. Background checks are a little racist. We should get rid of background. It's not how it works, okay? Like we can reform things. It's not like oh my god, like we like black people in the United States, whether you know or not, already know all these systems are racist. It's like the system, it's the lived experience of all of us, right? Like we.
It's not racist.
You're reiterating my point.
But, like we understand,
it's not even racist.
We understand that like there are biases in the systems that are in the side we live for. That doesn't mean we need to get rid of all of them. Like we can reform them. Like background checks for guns, especially in the case of stopping felons from getting guns, are probably really good. And in fact, the argument that like background checks don't even that don't catch people is probably more evidence that background checks are more a deterrent from people from getting guns through avenues where background checks are required, rather than saying that background checks aren't effective.
Also, is every felony disqualify you from owning a gun in America? So like if you're charged with like owning a pot-bellied pig illegally, you lose your gun rights for the rest of your life. Like it would make sense maybe if it was like people who are charged with violent crimes or something like that. Then, but like not. There's a lot of stupid felonies that have nothing to do with violence that shouldn't.
A lot of people with an ounce of weed.
I don't disagree with you. Yeah, but so maybe the people that we restrict guns from, we can change that. Like maybe someone who committed tax fraud, right? At a felony level, or like did something like felony like theft or robbery, shouldn't have their ability to take guns away, shouldn't have their voting rights taken away. You know what? Like I think like there's some reforms that we can go through there, right? But that doesn't mean that I don't think that the fundamental idea of like using background checks as a screening way to stop people who don't want to have guns, right, from getting them is like bad idea.
Why? I just explained why it's completely feckless.
We're talking about school shootings.
Squan, I want to be able to respond, and then Doobie and Scott, please. Squan?
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah. So I agree with Dolphin and username here, where just saying that okay, there's the background check and everything is not reason to just do away with it. It is still reason to look at it, right? And to say okay, there's a distinction between banning someone from purchasing a firearm versus just allowing a person to own one, however they might. And so I think I'm basically fine with Biden's policy. What I'm not into is the fact that there's that knee-jerk kind of quality to it that username brought up earlier, where it doesn't seem particularly like it maps on to this case that there's the anniversary for it now, where like these school shooters probably aren't already convicted felons who would be prevented from having a gun, right? Like the ghost gun thing doesn't really apply to them, and so it feels like there's a swing and a miss here, and I'd like to focus on that. Like this doesn't, the ghost gun thing, I want to take it back to the ghost gun thing doesn't really answer the problem of this school shooter thing. That's why I want to focus more on like, okay, I think the motivation behind these school shootings is more interesting to tackle.
I think. So wait, I have a question for you, Spawn. So like,
Sure.
let me like restate what you said a little bit. It sounded like you almost said that like you don't like the knee jerkiness of the policy. Is that?
So
you don't
the
like
way
the idea that it's
Don't
like a
make
knee
fun
jerk
of my art.
reaction
All
to
right,
the
it took a long
shooting.
time.
I don't like that.
right.
So I'm fine for Biden's
I am
policy.
not an
like,
artist.
When you really look
That
at
took
it,
a long
like, hey,
time
he just
for me
wants
to
to
make.
close loopholes on this. You know, it's worthy to say, do you want a convicted criminal?
All right.
And let's.
Well, I don't
take
have
it in
money
good
to
faith
hire
that
an
he means,
artist,
You know,
so
someone
if
who's
you want-
convicted for
you want to
violent
hook
criminal
us
acts,
up,
right?
then
Don't
you
buy
need
a
to
gun.
fucking
You may as well not
subscribe
print a 3D
more or
gun.
something,
I
because I
think
ain't got
that's
the money
probably
to do
fine.
that.
Everyone would probably
I gotta
agree
do
with
it
that.
myself. All right?
Now, and I just dislike that this is brought up in relation to, Biden could have
I'm a
brought
master
this up,
debater and a
there's other
masturbator.
times you can mention this when it's like attached
Not an
to
artist.
this Sandy Hook thing. It's it doesn't answer what the problem is. It's totally. Is there anything more you'd like to?
Well, it's
clarify there?
about it
Actually,
because
no, that's good.
what I think it was like one of the fathers or something of one of the victims climbed this construction site, got arrested, and then he was trying to make a message. Technically, yeah, it's still today. So today, and that was supposed to be against Biden, and there's been activism coming from people that were victims or like
night, Shadow Warden.
felt empowered by the Parkland shooting to come after the government and try to enforce more legislation. And they're claiming that Biden has failed to do so, and they're putting a lot of the gun deaths that have happened since Biden became president on him because he was vice president at that time. He made promises on the campaign trail. So that's how they're trying to relate it, even though I would agree with you that it's not particularly about what happened in Parkland. That's how it involves that.
I hate you so much.
It's like a weird answer from Biden because it doesn't, do anything. Like even it's like, okay, sure, because the dialogue is basically, hey, you said you do something about guns, and he's like, well, I am doing something about guns, but it's like it's not.
Well, it's
do
humorous
with it,
because if you ask gun rights activists, I imagine they would say Biden's never let them sleep, and he is trying to do a lot, but they've been fighting against him. So
yeah, I mean, from the point of view of this person, because it's not really answering their complaint, because they're worried about school shooting, right? That's their main problem. And they're not worried about hunters and whatever. They're worried about people who have, who are gonna kill kids. I think, and where I'm seeing that going, I think that the result of this is going to be further encouragement for people to actually just pull their kids out of public schools more, because if they're considered to be danger zones, basically, if there's a considerable risk, I think that's just going to encourage more homeschooling and private schooling and tutoring over public schools.
Doobie and Scott.
I think a home with a gun in it is far more dangerous than a school, than any given public school in the United States. That being said, I think it's kind of gross that gun rights activists, quote unquote, I hate saying gun rights because these are fucking toys we're talking about realistically, right? That these people co-opt the black community, right, and cloak themselves in the impression of black people, say, oh god, these laws are racist, and we need to get rid of them because they're racist and they're oppressing black people. But people talk about the 1350 thing, but the other 1350 is that like half the gun deaths in this country every year are black Americans, right? Black people are far more likely to be killed, to be wounded by guns in this society, right? And the solution isn't to make it easier to get guns where they live, right? It's to take the guns away from the people who are using the guns to kill them, right? Typical gangs in these areas, right? So I don't understand what you guys are like proposing. Like, so it seems like you guys think that if everybody just had a gun, gangs wouldn't be an issue because people would just like fight them in the streets or some shit. Or if a gang member tried to mug you, you're walking down the street, looking down at your phone, someone pops up behind you with a gun. Oh well, you're just going to turn around and shoot them. That's not how the world works.
I'm proposing.
I think take away the guns.
What I'm proposing is
the American government can't even keep track of like who's supposed to have a gun. Like this simple gun just a simple.
Yeah, it's a really difficult situation.
And the background check is like completely like non-functional garbage. How are they gonna actually, if they can't get that right, how are they gonna get like banning guns right? How are they gonna what do you want?
Okay, so So I think
like one of the reasons that the government can't respond to like shit like this is because there's actually laws in place that stop them from. So for example, I believe there's a law that stops like we have registrations of like who buys like guns based on like the gun serial number or whatever, and it's they're kept by like individual shop owners, but it's illegal for some reason for the government to like digitize this. Like a list that already exists can't be digitized because like gun rights activists are pushing against it.
Yeah, so I was called out, I think, somewhat specifically, and I believe it's my turn unless Doobie wanted to finish his point.
Well, I just wanted to respond to the last username real quickly.
Yeah.
To be very clear about like what I'm proposing. So my ideal situation would be a constitutional convention to get rid of the Second Amendment. I think it's outdated. I don't think there's a good reason to have this, but that's really hard to do, unfortunately. So right now, I think the realistic thing to do is to regulate the fuck out of guns and gun ownership, to restrict the types of guns that people can have, to require that they get registered, require that they get some kind of training if they're going to have them. I think we should outlaw handguns, for example, entirely among like the general population. And yeah, you're saying, hey, well, if we do that, people just aren't going to turn them in, right? You know, people will, just have a black market for these handguns, and that's true. That is definitely going to happen. We'll definitely have issues with that.
Unless they need a building permit, then they'll have 6 months to get rid of that gun.
Right, but I think you can do like a buyback program initially, and give people a cutoff date. Say, hey, turn your gun in. It's illegal now. You can't have this. And if you have it, and we find you with it, you're going to get a punishment, right? You're going to go to jail. You're going to have a massive fine. Your life's going to suck if you don't turn over this toy, right? And if people choose not to turn it over and to risk being caught, right, then hey, that's on them. Right, then they get put in jail, they get fined, whatever we decide the consequences.
Okay, so
and over time, right, as we reduce the population of guns in our society, so we make our society safer, right? I think we'll be better off.
All right, so there's a ton of points that we got to get through. First, you called me out specifically, and Top Dolphin a little bit here, in terms of using the black community as a guns rights activist, because by stating that these things are racist because they overwhelmingly disproportionately harm the black community. So first off, I have been on stream several times over and over and over again saying that that the NRA and many guns rights groups are a fucking joke, because if they actually wanted to help solve this problem, what they would do is they would take the case of individuals that have had their gun rights taken away, that are black Americans in places that are disproportionately hit by gun violence. And the fact that they don't do this absolutely shows that they don't actually care about gun rights, because they're more worried about the messaging of their white voters or their white donors as opposed to actually solving this problem. So I resent that first and foremost. Secondly, no one engaged with the fact that we talk about background checks for guns, and I simply stated out of 76,000 triggers, only 13 actually led to convictions. And the fact of the matter is that they don't work. Now you could counter and say, well, we could have better background checks that don't disproportionately affect people as much like we do in companies, because obviously private industry always does a much better job than the state at doing these things. And so obviously the solution would be to use the free market, but none of that ANCAP craziness with facts and data. Here's the other problem, is that gun registration, that you say we should digitize it, we should register more guns. The fact of the matter is that gun registrations don't prevent crimes. They simply don't. In multiple states have been sued, and when they were sued about these programs, what they found is that you could count in less than one hand. The most egregious was Hawaii, which could not find a single instance in the entirety of gun registration, in the entire history that Hawaii has had it, of them ever solving a single crime because of gun registration. Many states could say 3 or 4 maybe, because the fact of the matter is that people don't leave registered guns that they commit crimes with themselves at the scene of the fucking crime. they take the gun with them, or if they do leave the gun and they toss it somewhere, it's usually not registered to them. So the idea that gun registration is an effective tool is fucking stupid. And more so when you talk about the idea of getting rid of the Second Amendment, you completely dismiss everything last username brought up about why the Second Amendment exists and about the deterrence that it has in terms of the authoritarianism of our state. But even more so, you completely dismiss all of the data that shows that when you increase gun laws and when you increase gun control in an area, violent crime tends to go up. And the best way to reduce violent crime in an area is to make sure that concealed carry is accessible to everyone as cheap and easily as possible.
Okay, so I think we already went through the authoritarian thing earlier, right? This fantasy that you have. And I think I thought
it's not a fucking fantasy. Stop fucking putting me down by calling guns toys and by saying I'm dealing with fantasy. Deal with my fucking arguments or get the fuck out. If you can't deal with the argument, deal with it.
Hold on. You're apparently forgetting the argument we had a little bit ago, right? Because when we went through the January 6th thing, right, where you agreed that they'd be morally justified in using violence against police and government agents at the Capitol, right? I then asked you, okay, well, what about all the other groups in this country who feel like they're being oppressed? What about the fucking white nationalists, the black nationalists, the fucking
Please tell me how I forgot about it, and please make your point relevant.
Well, do you understand how encouraging people to use violence against the government when they think the government is authoritarian for not working in the way they think it should work, right, is a bad idea, because it could lead to a situation where we have groups all over the country that think the government's authoritarian for different reasons and start using violence against government agents.
I just dismissed with this entire bullshit. No, Doobie, shut the fuck up. You ignore every single argument I make. You ignore every single argument I make.
Can I just
you attack me
really
on several points.
Fabio Library will he monologues for 5 minutes, and then as soon as Doobie starts speaking, he just interrupts like crazy.
Yeah, it's very simple, actually, Stardust. If you deal with the fucking points I made instead of pivoting like a fucking coward because you know you're wrong and refuse to actually make an actual argument.
Are you calling me
but
the
instead,
coward, or are you calling
No, I'm not calling you
the
a coward, Stardust. You're just interrupting because you think it'd be a good point for the debate. That is what I am saying. You go back to an argument that we already had, saying that I forgot this argument when I didn't forget this argument. I specifically said, welcome to be a fucking welcome to being an anarchist. Deal with the points I made or get out.
Okay, I feel like I am dealing with the points you made. I think you
haven't dealt with a single one.
Oh, let him finish.
Why your fantasy, right? And it is a fantasy of the American population rising up against a tyrannical
Congratulations, you're a coward.
Is absolutely unrealistic, and it's not something you should encourage at all, because our people's standards, right? A certain group standard for what is authoritarian, what is tyrannical, when the line has been crossed and they can rise up against the government, start shooting police, right? Is gonna be fucking all over the place, right? And you don't have a clear line, and if you did have a clear line, it would be different entirely from like Nick Fuentes.
I did, and I completely explained it with a non-aggression principle, gave you several context, and you're bringing up an old argument that you think you are winning because you can't deal with any of the arguments that I made. So stop being a coward.
I want to hear what. Shut up, Doobie.
I don't think it makes sense to try to hang your hat on the non-aggression principle, because there are groups in this country who genuinely believe that they are being aggressed upon, not just by the government, but by other forces working within the government, right? Whether it's the Jews or it's the white nationalists that are oppressing them, right? That they're in the government. So yeah, they believe that they're being aggressed upon currently within a racist system, within a system that's trying to breed them out, right? By encouraging race mixing, whatever the fuck, right? These people feel like they're being aggressed upon. Their NAP has been violated, and now you're saying that they can use violence because they feel like their NAP has been violated. That's ridiculous.
Right. So what we've learned is that frogs are indeed slimy because you're too much of a fucking coward to deal with any of the debate points that I made. And instead you go back to this other point to try and hammer it because you know that as a radical anarchist, these are the ideas that appeal to the audience most by attacking me on. So you are a coward, and I'm done discussing this with you.
I don't feel like I've been avoiding anything you said. I'm responding directly.
Stop lying.
It seems super.
Maybe if somebody here, maybe I'm missing something.
I gotta take some of his debate tactics, bro. That is wild. You're a coward, and I refuse to engage with you.
Okay, wait, what? Really quick.
No, I gave him like 10 points, and he didn't argue any of them.
You
10 seconds, please.
10 seconds, then we'll go to Wiggle and then Squirm.
So I do think Scott is a very intelligent person. So there's a possibility that I'm missing something, right? I've missed some piece in the puzzle here, right? So if any of you guys are aware of that piece, please tell me what I'm missing, what I'm not responding to.
Slimy little fucker.
Yeah, Wiggle. I think I might have skipped last week's name. I'm not sure if I did. But then it's fine. Yeah.
It seems like conversations happened several times, and then Scott has said that he feels like morally that they have the ability to do so, but he understands that the state is preventing them from doing so, and then that's the understanding that you want. So it's like, what are you pushing for beyond that? It feels like he's not going to budge on that, and then you keep pushing that subject, which is preventing everybody else from engaging in the discussion because it's becoming about you and Scott.
Okay, so
let's move on. Sorry. Last year's name and Scron.
If you think that that standing up to the government with guns is a fantasy, I mean, look at what a few hundred Canadians with trucks can do to influence the government. Now, the government definitely had the firepower to get rid of those trucks instantly and stop what they're doing instantly, but they didn't, because that's not how resistance to the government works. You don't have to be as powerful as the government would be in an all-out war in order to influence them. You just have to have deterrence.
Okay, but we're not talking about like just influencing, right? With like protests or like trucks. We're talking about like the encouraging people to use violence against the government that they believe is aggressing upon them, right, in a tyrannical way. Right, so if the Canadian truckers started shooting at police, right, started shooting at Justin Trudeau, right, you wouldn't have the situation, right? What you'd have is
the only one who's encouraged it is you.
Oh my God!
Yeah, like
not
domestic terrorists and the movement. I'm not sure I would even encourage the truckers to do what they're doing. I'm just saying that if you're just talking about who has power, you don't need a lot. You don't need to be as many guns as the government in order to have power over them.
Yeah, maybe you don't need guns at all.
All you want. Hey,
yeah, but it helps.
Right, and if you would like to make your argument, you can address like all the other points that I made.
One.
Yeah, so I'm interested in what solution we each have for school shootings and where our logical conclusions take us. So it seems like for Doobie, correct me if I'm wrong, it's let's just take people's toys away, right? Scott wants concealed carry basically to be normalized, because I think I can sum up his position as preparedness being valuable when it comes to guns. Last username seems to agree somewhat with Scott with some measure of deterrence, but he's not that specific. I would like to hear more from last username on that. My conclusions that the concerns are more reason to pull kids out of public schools.
Was how I would solve gun violence
I'd like,
in schools.
More conclusive ideas discussed. Basically, what's the policy change that we each see? And I like
it has to do with like the school. Oh, but I mean, I'm gonna answer anyway. It has to do with like the school, right? Because like you're looking at the people that are committing these school shootings. Seems to be a lot of these people are like people that went to these schools, and then there's I think someone was bringing up data that came from the article where they didn't showcase the data in the article, but they just said that like a vast amount of these people who commit these shootings telegraphed this and told people there's like cries for help, and they did so anyway. It seems like they're ignored. So it seems, and then after these school shootings, there's suicides that happen because of like people have survivorship guilt, etc. So it seems like a lot of this is tied to mental health problems and schools in particular, because schools are places that stop you from having a gun if you follow like the law, and these individuals are coming there breaking the law and then attacking these unarmed individuals, and it seems to be these are former students. It seems to be they're suffering from mental health problems, and then they're also creating more mental health problems by engaging in these school shootings attempts even.
I promise I'll be quick.
I think that's a really interesting thing to bring in, that, looking at schools themselves and their mental health policies. I'd like to hear from...
I promise I'll be super quick, because you said that I would solve the problem in a way that I wouldn't solve the problem. The number one thing that I would advocate to fix this solution is make it mandatory that every single child have a date on the calendar every 2 months where they go and see a guidance counselor, and they don't actually have to talk to the guidance counselor, but to destigmatize the idea of seeing a guidance counselor, so that people and students don't bully them or look at them weird because they're going to a guidance counselor, because everyone has to go to a guidance counselor at some point, and that would allow people interactions with mental health professionals without any stigmatization or without being bullied for it. That would be the number one thing I would advocate for first and foremost.
Is it fair to say that you basically agree with Wiggle, at least, outside of your ANCAP fantasy of having everything, non-government, but like, would you be willing, at least in the short term, for having like government subsidizing that guidance counselor visit?
I mean, if we're currently dealing with a public school, then
yes,
then like
until
obviously,
obviously
that would be doing.
I would. Raising money to do so. I don't know if you would be for raising money, but you would agree that having this in place is something you agree with. It's just the money. Is that?
I'm not what some of my ANCAP friends call a compass, which is people that always point north, even when a brick wall is there. I understand that sometimes you have to go east and west in order to the end goal. And in this instance, I think destigmatization of mental health and making it an actual structural way that people can speak to guidance counselors without being judged or bullied is the first thing we should be focusing on first and foremost.
Well, sure. Let's try to get some other people to answer this question. Then top Dolphin.
Your mic.
So smart.
Muted.
It's just
muted.
His brilliance.
What would be mandatory is not actually talking to the
but I'm not going to shoot up the school because of
just
it. Right?
Going to the guidance counselor's office.
What I would do
just giving them that opportunity
fix this problem.
Where they
Man,
won't
I was
get
on a
made
roll.
fun of for it.
What I would do to fix this problem is I think the mental health angle is really cool. And I'm always a proponent for more mental health. But I don't like requiring kids to go to guidance counselor every two years. Like I don't know like if that's the specific answer, but like. The idea of getting children more involved with their guidance counselors or mental health counselors in schools is like really good. I like that. Personally, I think most of the time when kids have access, kids probably shouldn't have access to a gun without parental supervision. So I would like to put laws in place about the storage of guns,
exactly
saying they probably
have
to be locked and like children
Genesis
probably shouldn't have access to.
You just put them in front of a counselor.
Safes. Gun safes.
They don't
that's
have to
like
talk.
the
they don't have to do
avenue
anything.
I would go about it.
But
if you're talking about like policy
if
change.
everyone gets pulled out of class,
there's a lot of stuff with it, and I
sometime
would advocate
because
that
their number comes up.
But personally,
then nobody
I would say,
gets
like,
made fun of or bullied
requiring guns to
because
be
they
locked
decided
and
to go
stuff
to
like
the
that
guidance
would be like
counselor.
really cool.
It just
I think the individuals who do this though, I would want them to be not guidance counselors per se, but a professional that's brought in to work in the school, and I do not want them to have any sort of like sexual relations or anything with any of the other teachers. Because I had guidance counselors, I had a guidance counselor that had like another teacher as their husband or what have you. Imagine how that would affect you if you were in that class and you knew that your guidance counselor is married to this other person. Do you really believe that they're not going to talk about you at some point in time? I would want it to be like a somebody that's licensed only to do this, not to help people with their college applications or anything like that, only to do this, and that they didn't have any sort of like intimate relations with any of the other teachers.
Yeah, I mean,
outside of like friends.
You can talk to them just about college prep.
Stardust, do you have
an answer? You can talk to them about
maybe
like testing, how to write better papers. Like you can do whatever.
I think that sure, I'm encouraging the use of guidance counselors is a good idea, but oftentimes those guidance counselors have like 300 kids for each guidance counselor. So it's not necessarily like, I mean, it's a starting step, but I don't know if that's really a good solution either. A lot of these kids, as stated earlier, are not previous offenders, right? They are that shooting that they do is the first
it's
offense
like the moment
that
I
they
support
do.
something, they're like, well, that must be bad.
Based on that study, that like 75% of people who plan to do one of those somehow communicate it. There's clearly like a lack of connection there, right? Like that when that happens, that they should be referred to mental health people, mental health providers, and I don't know how we can facilitate that.
Floundering, trying to find a way to disagree with me.
When we have guidance counselors who are so like over stretched thin, basically. I mean, I think I agree with the idea of like making it mandatory to lock guns if you have children under a certain age in the home. I can maybe even say that like maybe a training for parents, right? Training for parents if they own guns and how to respond to situations and how to properly protect their children, right? Especially given that domestic violence apparently is increased with homes that have a gun in them. Yeah, I suppose that
it's not fart
the
dust,
mental
it's
health
shark
thing is
dust.
very important, but there's
It's
just
shark
so many
dust,
issues
boys.
with this. It's like
Get it right.
I don't know where to even begin.
This is how.
I guess
This
it's
is
a good
what.
start.
This is what it is, boys. Shark
Last
dust.
username.
Yeah, I mean, like whenever we talk about, sending kids to counseling and such to solve these problems, I always kind of lose my problem-solving boner because it sounds like, yeah, I guess it can't hurt. In theory, it sounds good, but I think it takes a really special, brilliant kind of person to, counsel someone in a way that diverts the course of their life from shooting up the school to not doing that.
It really doesn't.
I found
really
that,
doesn't.
few psychologists or psychiatrists or therapists are actually that good, and even fewer guidance counselors are that good because guidance counselors are overworked and it's just not, they're not really cut out for that. They're not qualified for that, right? Like guidance counselors, they can kind of tell you like, here's what college you might want to go to, here's how to do your career, but like dealing with really complex emotional disturbances, I don't know. Like I say, it can't hurt. Maybe we'll get lucky, but I wouldn't count on that making a huge difference. That's all.
Last username. The data shows at least in suicide, right? When individuals that had issues with suicidality were interviewed, like kind of surviving that and like no longer trading on like Beck's index and stuff like that on depression, asked like why they didn't kill themselves, the overwhelming majority of them said that they felt like they could talk to one person. That was the biggest difference. And so while I understand that like we look at this as like an extreme limit case school shooter, I think we severely underestimate what it means to some people to just have someone that they're talking to about their issues, and they feel alone and unable to talk. And if we can get the resources together one way or another to let them have someone to talk to where they don't feel like there will be social pressure to stop them from talking to someone, I think we would be surprised by how much of a difference that can actually make.
I think the importance is somebody that is specifically there to treat a kid like they're an adult. Because when you're in school, you're constantly be treated like you are lesser, like you are not an adult.
Even
PrimeCayes
one person had to nod on that point.
That's restricted themselves through their job, but is treating you like an equal, like an adult, allows these threats or these things these kids may be saying to be seemed like real. That there's some authenticity. So one of these kids is cynical. Let's say they just come off as cynical. Oh, they say they're going to beat up people or they're going to bring something to school, what have you, and people just laugh it off. This is an adult that's going to talk to them the same way they would talk to you, last username, or I, or anyone else that's an adult, instead of treating them like they're 14 or 15 or 16. I think that allows other adults to have a way in to what this kid was thinking. Because they may not listen to the kid, but they'll listen to a professional that says there's something going on here. Like you should pay attention.
Right? But I
can see that. I think kids not being treated like adults is really at the core of the problem of the problems.
It's an interesting theory.
The mental problems that teenagers have. So yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just sort of prejudiced about this. And I like the idea of just having a routine visiting someone so that it's destigmatized that Scott was talking about. It also seems like it would work.
Okay. Lastly, Doobie, your thoughts on this? That question?
Live a little.
Just
rolls up, says, I just jump in, no idea what's going on.
Yeah, so I posed a question to go around for everyone, basically saying, okay, what's the solution that kind of goes to the logical conclusion that we all have for school shootings? So if there's like a policy push or something. So some people have said, right, they want to push for mental health, and some have said, okay, more home ownership, gun control. I said, encouraging more private schooling. So for you, how do you
I don't want to be treated like an adult. I want to be Peter Pan.
What everyone's just talked about.
You heard it here first, folks.
Really
Wellspring wants to be a young boy that kidnaps children and bullies pirates.
Like in terms of like why kids carry it out or whatever. I think it's bullying, if I remember correctly, and like other suicidal tendencies that result in them lashing out, whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it does seem like a mental health issue, like obviously, and I don't think that the solution is private schools. I think the solution is not just having the government come in and provide mental health services, but you need the parents, the school teachers, the counselors. You need people to be looking for signs that a kid is feeling this way. And then when they see the signs, they need to act on it, right? They need to talk to these kids as if they're human beings, and let them know that maybe life feels like shit right now, but it's not going to be.
I had
to
fuck with you.
If that could be done, would it be necessary to take guns away?
Yeah, well, this is why I said earlier. I think the problem with school shootings is actually like a pretty minor issue in terms of like the gun control debate or the gun debate, because it happens so rarely. So few of the gun deaths are due to school shootings, right? So it's a problem, but it's not the main problem when it comes to guns. I think, in my experience, dealing with a lot of suicidal kids, I think it's loneliness and it's bullying are like the top two causes of like people these kids feeling this way, at least the ones that I've dealt with over the years, and there's been a lot of them, unfortunately. Not feeling like they can talk to their parents, them losing a close friend that was the only friend they could talk to, and now they feel like they have nobody, and it's literally loneliness and bullying. So I think you need to tackle those things, and the way to do that, I think, is to encourage or to teach counselors, teachers, parents, even other kids how to spot the signs of somebody feeling this way, so they can make some kind of effort to help them.
I have a question.
Last username.
We gotta.
Oh yeah,
we gotta.
Sure.
Yeah, we gotta go.
You just watched a clip from our Twitch channel, Fabian Liberty. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe here on YouTube, or go ahead and give us a follow on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty.